Hi, my name is Tiffany Hogg, and I will be doing my project on Jerry Brudos. He is known as the Lust Killer, and he is also known as the Shoe Fetish Slayer. So, just a disclaimer, my drawings and pictures are not the best. I'm not an artist, so don't judge me. But first, we are going to be talking about his background and his early life. So, his full name is Jerome Henry Brudos. He was born January 31st, 1939 in South Dakota, specifically Webster, and he was the youngest of two sons, which will come into play afterwards. He did have a rough childhood, moving around a lot. He did start off in South Dakota where he was born, moved to California, and then ended up in Oregon, where all of the bad started to happen. So Jerry's childhood wasn't only rough because of the moving around, but also because of the relationship he had with his mother. She was quite displeased to find out that she had a son rather than a daughter, which obviously wasn't his fault, but she did take her anger out on him anyway. This caused him to have quite a strained relationship that had anger. Since they did have this rocky relationship, it could have caused Jerry to have quite a traumatic childhood as well. So for the reasons that were found through my research, the reasons of moving around, the troubled relationship he had with his mother, and the loneliness that can follow from both of these situations, it really could cause Jerry to have quite an unstable state of mind that could cause the following actions. The odd actions of Jerry did start at quite an early age, at the age of 5, in a junkyard. He found a pair of women's shoes and instantly had an attraction and obsession with them. This was the very beginning of Jerry's fetishes. They consisted of women's shoes and also undergarments, which is quite disturbing. In the coming years, Jerry's obsession and fetish did escalate, and it actually caused him to go around his neighborhood and steal these undergarments and shoes from his neighbors. It did sometimes go as far as strangling or rendering these people unconscious just to get what he really wanted. The first known incident of Jerry's is when he was at school one day and he pulled out a knife on an innocent girl in his schoolyard. He demanded her to take off her clothes and do what he asked. So these events did not go unnoticed. He did get arrested and did have to spend his nights in a psych ward undergoing psychiatric evaluation, and spent his days in the high school continuing on his diploma. So 9 months later, when he was released from the Oregon State Hospital, he became an electronic technician. It did end up getting married. With his wife, he actually did move to Portland, Oregon, where all of the crime began to happen. And he did have 2 sons with his wife. So lots of problems were within the marriage. He asked for strange requests that followed his fetishes, but they did remain together despite all of the issues. So now we are going to look at Brudos' victims. The first victim was not murdered, but the other 4 that we will be looking at were murdered. And this happened in between 1968 and 1969. So his first known offense, other than the school incident, happened May 1967, where he followed a woman home, he strangled her to sleep, and then he also raped her and stole her shoes. But this crime was not connected to Brudos until much later. As you can tell from this timeline, that event did happen a year before the killing spree year. So now we'll talk about the disappearances. So the first victim was in January 1968 of Linda Slauson. She was a door-to-door encyclopedia seller. He invited her into his home, and she was murdered, and he actually removed and kept her leg to use as a shoe model for his shoe collection that he stole of women. The second victim was November 1968 of Jan Whitney. She actually had her car break down on the side of the road, and he was the one that stopped to help her. She was strangled to death, and he engaged in necrophilia. So the third victim was March 1969 of Karen Sprinker. Her car was found in a parking garage, and he removed her breast and used them as paperweights, which is quite disturbing. So the fourth victim was Linda Sally. In April 1969, she was kidnapped from the shopping mall where she was going to meet her mother. She was strangled to death. So Jerry actually had a lake nearby his house, and that is where he disposed of the bodies, and this was the end of the killing spree. There could be potentially more victims, but these 4 were the ones that were confirmed for sure to be the fault of Jerry. Now, those weren't the only victims of Brudos. He did have some victims that he tried to assault that had escaped. So when the victims had escaped, they report it. And the clues did lead to Brudos' door, and he confessed to the full murders of those women. So the clues that led to his door and the conviction of him were the collection of women's undergarments and shoes that were found in his house, the corpses in the lake, and the various body parts that were found in his house as well. So the convictions that he faced were the death penalty and also a life sentence for the 4 murders. So later on, after being in the Oregon State Penitentiary, he did try to appeal to his conviction but failed. And he was the longest incarcerated prisoner, which was interesting. He did die of natural causes in 2006, which ended up being liver cancer that they found out. Now begins the analysis, and I'm first just going to list down some of the oddities that Jerry had. So he was obsessive towards his fetishes, he was abusive towards his victims, he didn't seem to have any remorse at all, he engaged in necrophilia, and he had quite a few fetishes. So the next aspect I wanted to look at was nature versus nurture. So nature was anything that you are born with, genetically inherited, and nurture is anything that happens after the point of birth. So having abusive parents could fall under both categories, whether that trait was passed down, or also it could be quite scarring to a child to undergo those circumstances. Also, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is a mental illness, and also that could also show why he had no remorse, and also the fetishes. Having a lonely childhood could also cause his fixation on things, causing his fetishes, and also moving around a lot would be another nurture aspect. So now we're looking at the killer typologies. There were 3 that definitely applied to Jerry, some more than others. The first one was the visionary that hears or sees voices and tells visions to kill them. So he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, so that would make sense. The second one was the comfort-oriented hedonist, which takes pleasure in killing but also gets profit. So he could consider his collection of shoes or undergarments as profit. And the third one, which was the most applicable, was the lust-oriented hedonist, which associates sexual pleasure with murder. And having sex while killing and necrophilia were eroticized experiences, which would lead and explain to the necrophilia. So that is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. I definitely had fun making it. Thank you.